Let's talk about the beats of your scene. No, I don't mean those brief hesitations characters take before delivering a gut punch line of dialogue.
I'll whip their emotions into a frenzy by taking a dramatic pause!
And I'm also not referring to the tempo and meter of a catchy track.
A dope-ass beat.
A which beat?
A dope-ass beat.
I know what that is.
That's like a really good track.
I'm talking about the smallest individual units of story that determine whether or not your scenes captivate and compel the audience to stick around long enough to see what happens next. Conceptually, stories can be broken down into acts. Each act is made up of various sequences. A sequence is a series of interrelated scenes, and every scene can be subdivided into individual beats, bite-sized units of narrative that move us through the various revelations of character and plot as we hurtle towards a scene's unexpected yet inevitable conclusion. Beats may not look like much in the grand scheme of story, but they're certainly capable of packing a punch. That's because beats are where the action's at. Quite literally. A single story beat consists of two components, an action and a reaction. The reaction usually prompts a new action in response, to which another reaction occurs, and on it goes. Beats, therefore, are many episodes of conflict that advance a story scene forward through brief moments of change. They track the ups and downs, the back and forth, the push and pull, and zigs and zags of emotional value across a scene. The number and length of beats in your scene sets the pace for how fast or slow things change. So yes, beats are, in a sense, the very rhythm of your story. Now, if you want to hone your scene craft as a writer, you need to master the art of the beat, because the progression of beats will make or break your scenes. A series of beats that builds to a surprising, yet logically consistent payoff will have audiences turning pages or staying glued to their screens as the twists and turns of your story unfold. But it takes only a few instances of aimless or redundant beats before confusion and boredom set in, and any and all narrative momentum goes out the window. Learning to tell beats apart and identify the subtextual motivations behind a character's external actions is good practice for professional and novice writers alike. This starts by looking at works you already admire, analyzing how the stories that grip the attention of the very toughest audience in the world, yourself, manage to convey the emotional peaks and valleys of a scene in a clear and readable fashion. And that's exactly what we'll be doing today, using one of the most captivating and thought-provoking stories in television history, The Wire. Specifically, a particular favorite scene between Avon and Stringer toward the end of Season 3, which means yes, this video will include some spoilers for events that happen in earlier seasons. Breaking down the 17 beats of this scene will hopefully provide a better understanding of what makes this scene effective, and why the beats of your own scene should always be filled with action, especially when characters are engaged in dialogue. So, let's get into a little bit of the story theory we'll be using to analyze this well-executed scene. How do beats stack up together to form a scene? How can you be sure the section of story you're looking at is a verifiable scene, or simply an arbitrary cluster of character actions thrown together by an indecisive writer? There's been much written on what constitutes a scene, basic principles of how scenes are built, and the fundamental components that every scene intrinsically shares. I'm not going to cover these concepts here, as I'm sure they could fill a separate video by themselves, but I do want to lay down a basis for how most scenes move, their overall shape, in order to give us some standard by which to compare during the following scene analysis. See, a character enters a scene pre-packaged with a desire, a goal, an aim towards some end. The baggage they carry of past events, personal history, and the level and type of antagonism organized against them determines the status quo of what they desire and how they plan on going about getting it. But every character, in every scene, wants something. I suppose you could write a high-art, postmodern character who sits in a room for the duration of a scene and does nothing to no one for no reason, and perhaps this piece of work could serve as commentary on the existential ennui of modernity or something. But it would be boring. Characters are representations of flesh and blood people, and all living creatures since the dawn of time have sought to influence their surrounding environment to obtain their desires through action. But obstacles keep the character from achieving their ends. These forces of antagonism come in all forms, from the natural world to time itself. But more often than not, the thing standing in a character's way is another character, with their own set of goals and motivations, providing a counteraction to the first character's action. This frustration of desire causes the first character to have to reassess and come up with a new tactic to get what they're after, since their previous action failed to achieve the desired outcome. But of course, this will only generate another frustration to their plan, and on it goes. Beats of action and reaction begin to pile up as the characters go back and forth over their respective desires, until at last the scene reaches a climactic turning point and a new status quo is achieved, this time with something having changed irreversibly, meaning the story can't go back to the way things were for the characters before the scene. A clear victor is declared, a missing clue unearthed, or a fatal secret spilled. And this general shape of beats of action zigging and zagging toward a turning point that resolves the relentless tug-of-war applies even to scenes where characters seem to take no other action than talk. But of course, using language to get what we want is one of the most human actions we can take, and writers should approach dialogue with this in mind. If we want our dialogue to be as exciting as the physical action of our story, we need to root out what subtextual actions lie beneath our character's words. Understand what it is a character is trying to do by speaking this line of dialogue. That's because the actions we take say more about ourselves than words possibly could. We all know from our own daily lives that talk is less about what's said and more about how it's said. This is the expressive art actors use to bring life to inert, black and white lines of dialogue on the page. But writers sitting before their keyboards have little control over how a written line will be read. Instead, they must focus on a more important question: why this line of dialogue is being said. After all, a single line of dialogue, even a single word, can be employed for almost an endless variety of intent, as The Wire well knows.
Oh, fuck. Motherfucker. Motherfuck. Ball fuck. Ball fuck. 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 Fucking A. Motherfucker.
Creating a beat of dialogue that is actionable requires the writer to get crystal clear why this character is using these words in this order at this precise moment to get what they want. A beat of dialogue will only be as good as the action taken by the character is properly motivated and feels authentic to life and to the character. Renowned story consultant and lecturer Robert McKee. No, not that one.
Well, there are only 6 basic plots.
Not that one either. That one has perhaps the best book on the subject of actionable dialogue. In it, McKee advises writers to identify the subtextual action behind a character's spoken words and label it with a gerund phrase, or a brief description of the character's intention and strategy for the scene, using an ing verbal noun and some contextual information. Labeling an entire scene's dialogue with such descriptions is as close as the writer can get to looking under the hood of a scene. Repetitive beats, or worse, beats of dialogue without any clear motivation behind them, will suddenly stand out as flagrant dead weight on the scene. What's important to remember about this technique for assessing your scene is that the audience won't check your story map or ask that you show your work. They only intuit the action behind a character's speech. Labeling the action behind the dialogue is for the writer to check whether or not a scene's beats are progressing in a logical and interesting manner toward the payoff of the turning point. It doesn't much matter if you choose to label a particular beat as convincing instead of persuading, so long as you're clear about the motivation behind the choice of words. So with all that in mind, let's see if this action analysis applies to a scene of dialogue in David Simon's American epic, The Wire, which has no shortage of colorful talk. The HBO drama's 5-season-long arc focuses on the futility of the war on drugs and the crushing, dehumanizing effect institutions at every level of life have on the individuals who move through them. A true-to-life, gritty Baltimore setting was chief in helping the series stand apart from other countless police procedurals on television in the early 2000s. And it wasn't long before the show became revered or reviled, depending on who you ask, for its near-impenetrable dialogue that characterized protocol within the overlapping arenas of metropolitan police.
Yeah, you might want to run tag and title on these two trucks. He scoped us when we jacked the kid.
The inner-city drug trade.
His boy break, we gonna let him. But if he raise up, I'm on him, see?
And inefficient government bureaucracy.
Including the load criteria,
electronic piping and equipment layouts,
6 copies of your fire protection plan with emergency exits.
A license from the State Athletic Commission up on Calvert Street.
And all this linguistic flair, of course, served up with remarkably faithful regional accents.
Earn, and earn. Damn, what the fuck? We really talk like that? He even said it's supposed to be like the valet eating.
What did he say?
Man said he need to deal with me today, or I'm gonna take it to someone who can handle him.
Girl, you do have an ear.
Season 3 finds Stringer Bell, the number 2 man and de facto consigliere of the Barksdale gang, making inroads into legitimizing the gang's sources of income by moving drug money into other areas of civic life.
I mean, in 5 years, the Corleone family is going to be completely legitimate.
Like a young Michael Corleone, Stringer views himself as the smartest person in his gang family, and has designs to steer his future away from the liabilities of prison or death inherent to heroin trafficking. Unfortunately for him, his closest ally, Avon Barksdale, the leader of the gang, has recently become engrossed in a territory dispute with rising and dangerous newcomer to the game, Marlo Stanfield. Just as Stringer sees a course of action that will make B&B Enterprises, their money laundering shell company, into a viable and legal business, Avon decides to ratchet up the war after Marlo gets the upper hand on him in a surprise move that leaves both Avon's pride and shoulder wounded.
Ooh, Marlo. We're finna get back to old times, baby.
Avon feels obligated to retaliate or risk appearing weak. His reputation as a player in the game is at stake, and in Avon's world of the west side of Baltimore, the game is all there is.
The game is the game. The game is the game. Always.
This is the status quo at the close of Season 3, Episode 8, Moral Midgetry. As we enter the final scene, Avon and his top soldiers sit in a circle of ratty couches and chairs, strategizing their response to Marlo's attack. Stringer enters quietly from behind, his suit jacket open and his tie disheveled from a long day. Beat 1.
They're expecting us to hit back wild. That's what they're just waiting for. And we're gonna sit back on it for a while, let them sweat on it. Yo, we gotta talk.
As Avon games out his next move, Stringer requests some face-to-face time with the king.
Hold on. I mean, he got to come out on his corners. That's how he make money, right? We're gonna see who got the bigger war chest.
Avon flippantly dismisses the request and returns his attention to his war council. Beat 2.
Avon.
This time, Stringer demands an audience with Avon. He only needs to say his name one more time to communicate he's not asking anymore. Avon pouts and then ends the meeting with a half-hearted wave of the hand. Slim Charles and the rest all slowly rise and shuffle out of the room without looking either man in the eye. Beat 3. Stringer scratches his head as he thinks how best to approach talking Avon down from an all-out gang war.
Straight to the mattresses, huh?
He begins with a subtle comparison to Avon being like the hot-headed Corleone brother, Sonny.
No more. Not this time, consigliere. I want Salazzo. Now it's all out war. We go to the match.
Thereby calling Avon emotional and impulsive for jumping into the fray with Marlo. Again, Stringer thinks of himself as the Michael of their gang, the true dark horse leader who deserves all the credit for keeping the ship afloat. As current top dog, Avon doesn't appreciate this comparison and orders Stringer to get to his point.
Whatever, what you want, man?
Beat 4.
War, man, we passed this bullshit.
Stringer takes a risk and attempts to appeal to Avon's higher consciousness by framing a war with Marlo over a few street corners as petty and counterproductive to their shared goal.
Yeah, I forgot. I knew I forgot something. We the Trump brothers.
But Avon returns with a mocking caricature of Stringer's vision for their future. 2 drug dealers from the high-rises turn flashy real estate moguls. To Avon, this picture is a joke, something only the severely naive could ever believe is true. Beat 5. Stringer outstretches his hand as if giving a warning to a child.
Man, you don't give this shit up, We're gonna turn everything we built to shit.
He reminds Avon of their shared values, the type of life they've been working all these years to obtain, the big picture. But Avon only groans as he rises out of his chair and delivers an additional punchline to his joke.
The Chump brothers.
Not only does he clearly not share the same vision for his own future, but he believes Stringer's chasing this delusion has made them both out to look like fools. Right now, Avon requires a strong right hand as the war with Marlowe proceeds, but Stringer has his sights set firmly on tomorrow. He cannot possibly help with problems present today. In fact, it's likely Avon subconsciously blames Stringer's pushing the partnership towards outside investments and building zone permits as the reason the Barksdale name has fallen on the corners in the first place, and young pups like Marlowe are emboldened to make plays for the throne. Beat 6. Stringer lets his hand drop as he realizes he's not getting through. Avon continues on the attack, illustrating a new picture of Stringer as money-driven, weak-willed, and way in over his head.
You know what the difference is between me and you? I bleed red. You bleed green. What you been building for us? Huh? You know what? I look at you these days, you know what I see? I see a man without a country. Not hard enough for this right here. And maybe, just maybe, not smart enough for them out there.
Forget Michael. According to Avon, Stringer has in actuality always been more like the brother Fredo.
I can handle things. I'm smart. Not like everybody says. Like dumb, I'm smart and I want respect.
Beat 7.
Not hard enough.
Here Stringer decides to push back a bit, asking a question that directly challenges the one piece of Avon's emasculating illustration of him that burns more than the others.
No offense, but I don't think you ever really were. And you got skills, yeah, no doubt, but what?
Avon, perhaps realizing he's touched a nerve, now pads his words with some apologies and compliments to soften the blow. Beat 8.
What, cause I don't shoot up a block indiscriminate? I ain't hard enough?
Stringer continues to press what exactly separates him from other hardened criminals in their crew, as he lays bare the harsh realities of gang life. Avon says nothing and walks over to the table where he pours himself a drink. This is likely not the first time he's heard Stringer begin a diatribe, and he wants none of it. Beat 9. But Stringer has the floor now, and he continues his attack on Avon's romanticism of the game.
Because I think before I snatch a life, I ain't in this bullshit.
He flips the assertion that he's not a true gangster into a self-gratifying compliment of his own intelligence and discretion.
That's a life. What life you snatch, huh?
Avon cannot believe his ears. Stringer is obviously bluffing, and Avon wants to hear him say it. Beat 10. There's a dramatic pause. Stringer moves closer to the table. He looks Avon up and down and takes a deep breath, preparing to reveal a secret.
You know, Brianna went downtown, man, saw that detective. Man stoking her head saying that D'Angelo's death is no suicide.
Stringer mentions Avon's nephew, D'Angelo, who in Season 2 died in prison under suspicious circumstances. Avon's sister Brianna has a newfound interest in uncovering the truth about her son. Avon's arm subconsciously moves to cradle his shoulder, as though the very mention of D'Angelo's suicide opens up old wounds.
Yeah, so?
His voice is pure ice, though, and once again he orders Stringer to stop wasting his time. Beat 11.
Man ain't wrong about that.
At last comes the turn. Stringer drops the bomb. The two sit in silence as Avon swallows his drink, digesting what Stringer just said. Beat 12. Stringer moves in on Avon, confirming his worst fears. He was the one who ordered D'Angelo's murder and had it framed as a suicide. Avon searches Stringer's face until a flash of understanding hits him. Beat 13.
No, you couldn't do it. Brianna wouldn't do that shit. But there go a life that had to be snatched, Avon.
Stringer now proves his gangster bona fides, twisting the knife as he relates the murderous precision he's capable of executing. Avon continues to search Stringer's face for any sign that this is all some sort of sick joke, but Stringer is stone cold. Avon looks down at the table as if to collect his thoughts, then turns suddenly and attacks. The men wrestle around the table until Stringer pins Avon to the floor and presses into his wounded shoulder. Beat 14.
Yo, man, I took that shit off you, put it on me, man, because that motherfucker was out of pocket with that shit.
Stringer frantically explains his decision as he looms over Avon. who can only wince in pain, his hand over his shoulder again. Beat 15.
20 years above his fucking head. He flipped, man. They got you, me, and fucking Brianna. No fucking way, man. Hell no. Now I know you that family. You love that, but you want to talk that blood is thicker than water bullshit. Take that shit somewhere else. That motherfucker would have taken down the whole fucking show, starting with you, killer. It's fucking everything and everybody.
Stringer then moves from an explanation of his actions to a justification. He had to do it. He had no other choice. Both of the men breathe heavily for a moment. Avon once again is forced to silently swallow the new information. When he speaks again, it is only to ask for mercy. Beat 16. Another moment of silence as they both breathe ragged. Stringer begins to regain composure in his face. Avon, stuck underneath, switches to begging for mercy, which Stringer grants him, but not before putting all his weight on Avon's shoulder as he rises off him. Beat 17. Avon rolls on the floor in pain, then slowly rises and begins pacing the room, his hand moving between holding his shoulder and covering his mouth in disbelief. He finally slumps down atop a dirty mattress, this time perhaps with a greater understanding of the price you pay when you go straight to the mattresses. D'Angelo was murdered, the cost to be king is paid in blood, and his newly opened bullet wound and the red-stained shirt beside him serve as testament to his commitment to playing the game. On the other side of the room, Stringer wipes sweat from his face. Green light washes over the money-minded brains of the operation, who ironically first came here to stop Avon from going to war and save their future investments. Instead, his own wounded pride pushed him to reveal the one secret that could destroy his partnership, and now his future is clouded with uncertainty. A warehouse window divides the frame as the two men stare at each other, then at the floor, separated as friends and brothers, but both locked into a corner they'd put themselves into. And with that, the scene and the episode both end. For 17 rounds, these two combatants squared off and went head-to-head over their respective identities, who they each believe they are deep down, and what sort of world they wish to live in. Each beat contained a clear and definable action the character took in the moment to achieve his ends. The words they spoke, only colorful expressions hinting at their true agendas hidden underneath. About halfway through the scene, there was a clear and crisp turning point that divided the scene into sections, one with Stringer on the back foot as Avon attacked, the other with Stringer dominating until Avon surrendered. Sometimes the action and reaction within a single beat served as a poetic couplet, a sort of self-contained call and response. Other beats built off the one that came before, but all moved in a direction of increased tension and excitement as each line brought us closer to the scene's surprising yet inevitable conclusion. Notice the conversation never goes on tangents or bogs down in redundancy as characters stand around and chew the fat. It's a lean, mean, and well-oiled storytelling machine. Crafting a well-paced and clear-eyed scene with this many emotional rises and falls happening primarily through the dialogue does not happen on a whim or by waiting around for a generous and unexpected visitation from the muse. It requires a long and difficult process of articulating in painstaking detail the intention and strategy behind every beat of action taken by your characters, and then iterating lines of dialogue over and over in trial and error to find the perfect linguistic expression of that specific action. The work isn't pretty, but if given its due, will produce some exceptional results. I hope today's scene analysis has helped you understand the importance of crafting actionable dialogue beats in your own scene. And hey, by the way, did you notice any of the other techniques discussed on this channel used in this scene? Any reframes or the id and superego at play? No? Well, can't hurt to try. Okay, better leave it at that. Until next time.